Coming up, a bonus video this week as Michael Lambert and myself managed to find time to catch up for the first time in a few months, and we answered some of the questions sent in by viewers of both the Truth to Power channel and Michael Lambert's YouTube channel as well. Those of you that don't know Michael, please do check out his fantastic channel where he talks about the ramifications of Brexit. If you enjoy watching the Truth to Power channel, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me out by hitting the like button and especially by sharing a link to this video on your social media platforms. So, Michael, I had an awful lot of questions about the Labour Party and the stance they've taken on Brexit. So, for example, from Regan Elite, what do you guys think Labour would do with Brexit when they come to power? Do you think they'll just carry on or rejoin the single market and customs union? I've got Martin Bennett saying, how can Starmer cope if he gets to be Prime Minister of a country with a Brexit knackered economy? David Michaels saying, how do you feel about Starmer's decision to make Brexit work? There's Gary, who feels it would be a vote winner if there was a future potential for the UK to rejoin the EU single market. Leszek Szepecki, it's all very well to point out the obvious, how do you get the main parties, Tory and Labour, to admit it? Stephen Davis also asked the question, sorry I'm going on here, Richard O'Grady, Pete Lawrence, Diane Clark and Clive Geary. So, what's your thoughts, Michael?
My thoughts, Rob, are that I think Starmer made a huge mistake. The moment he said there is no question of us rejoining the customs union or single market, no question of us ever rejoining the EU, he immediately alienated an awful lot of people, for example, who might well have voted Labour last time, but who now have changed their minds because they have realised, as more and more people are realising, that obviously it was a disastrous mistake to go ahead with Brexit. He was saying there's freedom of movement's gone. And he's so adamant. I mean, he's as Brexit as Tories in the way he talks. We know that he didn't believe in Brexit and he wasn't in favour of Brexit. But I think he's just painted himself into a corner, and I just don't see any way of him getting out. Right. All he had to do was say nothing. Just say nothing. Just be a bit vague about it. Or well, it's too early to judge, and this, that, and the other. We probably won't rejoin, but there's always a possibility. Things may change. But to just shut the door so early on I think was madness. What do you think?
Yeah. I just think he's being very weak. He's already got a reputation for being a bit sort of fudged all the time, and I think he just needs a bit of courage, Michael.
Yes.
I mean, the guy just doesn't seem to have any courage. On a positive side, and this isn't going to sound very positive, I mean, if you remember when he was elected leader of the Labour Party, he stood on a platform of maintaining the manifesto that was drawn up under Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
And he's really backtracked on that. I mean, he's, I know the left of the Labour Party sees Starmer as a complete traitor to the cause, that he's just a red Tory. And although that, I'm sure I'm going to get told off for criticising the leader of the Labour Party, but I'm just hoping that by the same token, he's not going to almost stick by his word this time. I mean, the poll trackers are showing that there's a huge majority and a growing majority in this country that regret the decision to leave the European Union. So I don't understand the demographic he's after. Whether he's just trying to maintain the status quo because the Labour Party is so far ahead in the polls. Perhaps this is something else that he's going to backtrack on. But I have to say, Michael, I mean, I left the Labour Party when Starmer became leader.
Really?
And although I was honestly wanted to give the guy a chance, and to this point I still am hoping that he's going to prove his mettle. Yes. But it was a very depressing weekend listening to him on the telly. I
agree absolutely. And I think there's also another quite interesting point here, which is this, that what happens if things are really desperate in the next 6 months? And they're going to be in the next 6 months to a year. And supposing towards the end of next year, Sunak starts saying, well, we really tried, but we're going to have to start talking to the EU about perhaps some other arrangement. Starmer's going to be the only guy in the country who's for Brexit, make it work.
That would be horrendous.
But I mean, it's a possibility, isn't it? Because
I can see that happening. Yeah, I mean, obviously Sunak's been Brexit man from the beginning, but I mean, as you say, it just needs one of the adults in the room to just acknowledge the facts that Brexit has been a disaster. You don't have to rely on a self-admittedly leftist perspective channel like mine, or a sort of pro-EU channel like yours, to know that the experts are saying, I know we've all had enough of experts, but the experts are all saying Brexit has been a disaster. The Office of Budget Responsibility, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, these non-partisan bodies, wherever you look, is saying that the cure to the economic stagnation in the UK is to rejoin the single market and the customs union.
A lot of people are saying, this is all a clever plan. He doesn't want to upset the Red Wall people who voted for the Tories last time. So he wants them all to think that he wants to con them all, to convince them all that he's really pro-Brexit. Well, in fact, when he gets in, I've heard people say, serious commentators say, what he's going to do for the first term of his parliament, he's going to pretend to try gradually explain to people how we have to get a little bit nearer to Europe. And then in his second term, he's then going to start serious negotiations to rejoin at least the single market and the customs union. What sort of leader deliberately deceives people he wants to vote for him by telling him he's going to do something which he has no intention of doing? I mean, you've got to be straight with people. Somebody should just get up and say, look, this is not working. Yeah. Well, that's what he should obviously get up. It's not working. We have to do something about it.
Yeah.
But with the government's hostility towards Europe, it's really so difficult from where we are.
Starmer just needs to find some sort of backbone and just be honest with the electorate. And from the beginning of time, we've all said we just want honesty from politicians. But for God's sake, can somebody just be honest about Brexit? The majority of the population have realised it. Why are the leaders of the two main parties lagging behind?
Yes,
it's ridiculous.
Well, we know why Sunak's still banging on about Brexit and still pro-Brexit. It's because he's got his existence depends upon it. But in Starmer's case, it doesn't. If you're honest, I suspect all those people sat behind him are all thinking, "This is not right. We should be getting closer to Europe." And as I think we were saying just now about that. He was saying in Glasgow, wasn't he, about for the NHS, we shouldn't be looking upon bringing people in from the EU or anywhere else. We should train up our own. Well, it's just behind the sky, isn't it? And there's a desperate shortage of workers. You say we don't want to bring people in.
No, and I mean training people indigenously is not the answer. That's going to take years and years. We need them now, not in 5 or 6 years' time.
Exactly. He was unequivocal. Freedom movement is finished. It's all over.
And there are those that argue that the NHS, a major economy like the UK is draining the resources of nursing and medical people from the developing world. But I don't think that's true, Michael. I think that the NHS is part of it's like a symbiotic relationship, that they come to the NHS, they get trained in the best standards, and then they go back to their own countries in a lot of cases, and the science, the medical science is shared. And the NHS is a great provider of medical expertise overseas. Now, some people might think it's a very convenient excuse for it, but I really don't see that the NHS is being parasitic in terms of taking people from the developing world. I think it gives back as much as it takes. So there is every reason to increase the quota of foreign-born people coming into the NHS and bringing their skills with them. It benefits everybody.
But much of the crisis is because we sent away so many people from the EU, or we blocked them coming
absolutely.
back.
Yeah.
And they were people who would have come for maybe short term, they come for a year or two and then gone home again. Whereas if you come from the Philippines, you're probably going to bring your family with you, or you can't come. And
that's true.
It's just.
And they say there's 110,000 vacancies in the NHS right now. Last year, 130,000 UK nationals left the UK, let alone the EU nationals that left the UK. British people themselves have left, and a lot of them would have been working in the NHS as well. Why have they left? Brexit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's another whole subject on there that there's going to be a brain drain, or probably already going on. People are just going to see better opportunities elsewhere, and far from people queuing up to come to this country and us having the pick of the brightest and the best. I think our brightest and best are going to be looking elsewhere. I have a question from LED Violet, and she says, I'd be interested in both of your and Rob's opinion about when the next general election will take place.
Okay, well, hello Ellie, first of all, and thanks for always getting engaged in the comment sections. I note your name coming up a lot, so thank you for your support.
Can I echo that?
Yes, thank you. Fantastic. Really interesting question this, because Obviously, the Fixed Term Parliaments Act is now over, so in theory, Rishi Sunak could call an election at a time to suit him. But I don't know when that time would be before the deadline, which is, I believe, January 2025, I think is the very latest they could hold it, because they have to announce it in December 2024. I think the economic situation is just going to continue to get worse between now and then, so I believe the best time for Rishi Sunak, from his point of view, to hold a general election would be as soon as possible, because I think things are only going to get worse. That said, they are enjoying a little bit of a poll bounce at the moment. I mean, nothing substantial to write home about, but I think they're about 2 or 3% back up against Labour in the last couple of weeks. But the gap is still high 20s between the two parties. So if he did call in the general election now, it would be an absolute whitewash for the Labour Party. I mean, predictions are saying a majority of 2, maybe even 300 seats. So you'd think, well, he'd be crazy to call it now. But things ain't going to get any better, I don't think, over the next couple of years, with austerity 2.0 looming and all those Brexit chickens coming home to roost. What do you think, Michael? I just can't see it happening for another couple of years.
I think most of the Tories have now written off the next election. I think they reckon they're going to lose it anyway. It's a question of damage limitation for the next 2 years. I think it's very unlikely, I agree, that he's going to call an election before as late as possible. But of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the meantime, because things are deteriorating so fast at the moment that if there's mass unemployment in 6 months' time and there are businesses closing and there's real economic trouble, I mean, the government, the country may become practically ungovernable, and it is quite conceivable, I think, that they will not be able to carry on, just simply because everything will have turned to chaos.
It's I can see that. I mean, obviously we're talking about civil action, which they're trying to criminalise, and that's probably the subject of another video all by itself, this right to protest being taken away from us. But there's also obviously the industrial action, which are also trying to legislate against these so-called militant trade unions. The RCN, a militant trade union, okay. So you can see all that getting bad. I mean, so you see it as a point where they will have no alternative but to call a general election, just through what, pressure of public opinion?
Yes. I think so. I think if people are out on the streets now, people are not paying taxes and things, and if people are losing their jobs in the business, whereby they're more and more dependent upon the government, and the government's having trouble financing all this chaos. It might even come to the stage where we get the king appointing a government to carry us through. I know it sounds fanciful at the moment, but things are getting so bad so fast, and it's not as though there's any. You can look to any way of it turning or changing. We just know it's going to get worse.
Well, we're recording this on the 7th of November, the Monday, so we're still waiting for the details of austerity 2.0, so that's going to be the first turn for the worst, I suggest.
Yes. And I think there's just this general air of despair amongst so many of the population.
It just feels like the country's falling apart, doesn't it? Not just economically, but the very fabric of society. These warm banks and food banks propping up places. Poo in the water. Gaps on the supermarket shelves seem to be getting worse and worse, and I've noticed certainly fresh vegetables and are just not as fresh as they used to be. It just feels like it feels like we're living in Banksy's Dismal Land in Weston-super-Mare to me at the moment.
I actually spoke to someone in my local Lidl a few weeks ago about the vegetables and saying there were a lot of shortages and everything looks a bit stale, and he was saying to me, well, these days we get it in and we put it straight on the shelves because it comes straight off the lorry, and it's been on the lorry for 2 or 3 days longer than it would have been before. And he said we're throwing away huge quantities of vegetables because they're coming in stale. And of course we depend upon the EU for so much of our food imports. And as far as they're concerned, we're desperate. I mean, if you've got a chain of supermarkets supplying in Germany, I mean, they want it fresh and they want it right, and they want it on time. As far as we're concerned, we can't do anything about it.
No.
They can send us anything they like, really. We're not even checking it when it arrives. No. And there was that thing about that meat arriving, wasn't it, a few weeks ago, full of maggots and so on. Right. I mean, they can send us anything. We're desperate. We import, 40-50% of our food from the EU.
But as Jacob Rees-Mogg said, Michael, it would be an act of self-harm to actually control our borders. Absolutely ridiculous. Just very selfishly, I follow a vegan diet, and there are two very naughty treats I allow myself. One is something called Vegenaise, which comes in from America. That is been completely out of stock in the UK for months. I inquired to find out what the hell's happening. It's because they ship it through Germany, and because it's redistributed from a German hub, they're not bothering to export it to the UK. Now, I know that's very selfish. And the other brand is called Tofurkey, which do I don't tend to like meat substitutes very much, but that is one product I really like. And again, same situation. They've stopped exporting to the UK because their hub on the continent is just not finding the paperwork worthwhile. So, get out the tiny violins, but it's having a bit of an impact there. As if a vegan's diet isn't already restricted enough, it's getting worse post-Brexit.
Yes, it's a nightmare. You're eating grass.
Grass eating grass next, So, next question from my viewers, Michael, was from Otto Octavius, who asks, if you could choose any current Labour MP to be the next Prime Minister, who would it be and why?
Labour MP, that's a good question. The best one has been and gone, and that's Ed Miliband. I mean, I think he's really, really so good these days. He's really, he's always been so clever and so knowledgeable and really, really, really bright guy. I think it's a great pity that he's kind of out of the running. The other one I would go for is Wes Streeting, who I think is... I've been watching him ever since he sort of appeared on the scene a few years ago, and he always seems extremely competent and he looks the part. I think he'd be great. Beyond that, there are quite a few others that are quite good, but whether they want to be Prime Minister or not, I don't know. But certainly I think Wes Streeting would be my favourite.
Right.
How about you?
Yeah, I think Wes Streeting has seemed to be on sort of the right of the party, sort of the Keir Starmer mode. So I sort of feel that if they did... well, basically, it would have to be up to the Labour conference, I think, to actually try and challenge Keir Starmer's leadership. I think it would be unlikely to be Wes Streeting, although, like you, I've got a lot of time for him. Ed Miliband, I completely agree. Such a shame he didn't know how to eat a bacon sandwich properly, however that is, but it seemed to have cost him the election.
And the Ed Stone.
The Ed Stone, Absolutely, I've forgotten about that. I voted for Lisa Nandy, although I know a lot of my Scottish friends aren't a big fan of hers. I think she was pretty dissing about the Scottish independence debate, which I try and steer well clear of as a non-Scot. Let them decide on that one. Yvette Cooper, hugely impressive still. And just her superpower seems to be kryptonite to Suella Braverman. I mean, Braverman just folds, as did Pritzker Patel before Yvette Cooper. Hilary Benn, like you said, I'm not sure he'd be interested, but Hilary Benn, another very impressive figure. Chris Bryant, I know divides opinion, but I've got a lot of time for Chris Bryant.
I suspect he wouldn't want to be Prime Minister.
No,
I don't know.
No.
He's not on the front bench, is he? I don't know why.
No.
Why he isn't.
Somebody that I always find interesting is Richard Bergen from the left of the party.
I certainly agree with you about Lisa Nandy. I think she's a very bright lady. Although she was very pro-Brexit, I think because of her constituency being very pro-Brexit.
Yeah, I think she was. She sort of presented it as being representing her constituents rather than her own firmly held beliefs.
Okay, Viva Reo asks, what I want to ask is, will we ever be able to reverse Brexit and rejoin the EU before we completely destroy our economy?
I think my first initial response to that is I don't think it's any longer up to us. I don't think the European Union would have us back for the foreseeable future, certainly not with the current government. I think it would take some years to regain the trust of the EU before we can even begin to start negotiations or applications. There is this idea that as a part-way measure we could join EFTA, but again, the European Free Trade Association are made up of Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland, I think, and already Norway's made clear they don't want the UK to be a member, so I don't see that as being a potential door. You know, again, you come back to the Starmer thing of make Brexit work. What does that mean? Does he really think he can negotiate a return to the single market? And I can hear Ellie, that we mentioned earlier, and others screaming, it's not up to us. And she's quite right. It's really not. But who knows, with a different government, maybe with Keir Starmer or his replacement as Prime Minister, perhaps we can very tentatively start pre-talks about potentially rejoining at some point in the future. And I'm sorry if that doesn't sound very optimistic, Michael, but that's as optimistic as I can get sitting here right now. How do you feel?
I agree with you. I think it's going to be a very long time. I think we've behaved so badly, and especially with the business over Northern Ireland, we've behaved so badly. We've got so many people who are not well disposed towards us within Europe right now that I think they'd make it very difficult for us. And I also think that people in this country, particularly politicians in this country, are not going to they're not going to want to go in as sort of begging partners or as begging applicants.
No.
And so things are going to have to get, I think inevitably things are going to have to get very, very bad here before we get desperate, and we just have got no alternative but to try to rejoin. I don't think it's a question that we're going to sort of in 6 months' time say, oh well, perhaps we'll go and let them have us back in again or whatever. We're going to have to be really down on our whatever it is.
I think the hardest sell will be that the deal that we had before, it's absolutely impossible that we could ever get back to that again. So, there are people, Brexitists, that say if we did rejoin, we'd have to join the euro. Well, the truth is we'd have to make a pledge that we would at some point in the future join the euro, but there are many countries that have done that never have actually got round to it. So I don't see that as a barrier, but we certainly wouldn't regain our exemptions from various regulations. We wouldn't regain our rebates from the membership fee. It would be a far worse deal than what we had. That's gone forever.
That's why I think there will be so much reluctance for us to get, the newspapers and the right-wing politicians are all going to be dead against it because they'll think it's unfair and all the rest of it. But I think we might be desperate enough that we actually have got no alternative. I mean, it all depends on just how bad the economy gets in the next
I mean,
6 months, year.
This idea that perhaps as a halfway measure we could rejoin the customs union, which could potentially solve the Northern Ireland issues, or that we could rejoin the single market, which will allow the freedom of movement of people that even Keir Starmer seems dead set against now. But those are only facilities that are open for members of the European Union, as far as I can tell. So, we could negotiate and never say never, but the rules are those aren't options that are available as of today. So it's very depressing.
I think with the new government with a different attitude and a more friendly attitude towards Europe, might be able to negotiate some sort of deals whereby we can do trade a little bit more easily. Perhaps eliminating some of the paperwork in some areas and so on as a first step. But in terms of completely re-entering, I think the terms for a very long time will appear to be unacceptable to us, and they're fine now, aren't they? They didn't want us to leave, and we've left. And I think there was a lot of concern about how they managed without us. But I think they're getting on fine now. They've adjusted. And why would they want us back? We're just troublemakers. And troublemakers, all along never had our heart in it, really. Never really got involved in the way that other countries did, and never felt part of the centre of Europe, despite being a very important member and having so much influence. It's it's going to be difficult.
Kieran Grennan asks, I'd like to get your opinion on Mick Lynch. Personally, I think he's very good at dissing the Tories, but misguided on Brexit, as he believes it was going to protect British workers, when in reality, it's a bonfire of British rights. How do you feel about that one?
I agree. I think it's a great pity he was pro-Brexit, and I think he must be having second thoughts now. Now he thinks, what is actually happening, what the government are doing with workers' rights and so on. As far as he's concerned, I think he's a terrific guy. He's got that cool charisma. Very, very smart guy. He's one of those guys. He probably didn't have a great education, but he's just as sharp as a razor. I mean, really clever guy. And he has that presence, which is so lacking in so many politicians, particularly on the Tory side these days. And that's what you need. I mean, he's a great leader, fantastic leader. But it's a great pity that he's so pro-Brexit. What do you think?
Well, again, I'm a huge admirer of Mick Lynch. There's such clarity that he sees the current situation with, apart from regarding Brexit. He's got this Lexit sunglasses on that just allows him to see the benefits. I mean, one of my very good friends who's just moved back to the UK, actually, against the trend from Thailand, but he's a Lexiteer as well, and I speak to him about it. It's not something I think he feels passionately about. It was just on balance. But he felt it would be a way of... he saw the EU as a neoliberalistic project that was going to stop the state renationalising businesses and utilities. But there are plenty of EU members where, companies are nationalised, where the utilities are in public hands. I mean, the UK, for example, is the only country in the world with a privatised water sector. Which is crazy. So these things that they thought we couldn't do within the EU, I think is false. I think we could have done those within the EU. We could have nationalised railways within the EU. We could have nationalised public utilities, because other countries have done it within the EU. And so they think things like the same argument was things like VAT on gas. Yes, now that we've left the EU, they say, we can remove the VAT on energy. Well, we haven't, and yet there are examples of other countries just in the last year within the EU that have managed to remove VAT on gas. So these arguments for leaving the EU just never hold water, do they? It's just not true.
I agree. I mean, so much made up, isn't there, about what we could and couldn't do within the EU. But these stories, they get printed in the papers a few times and they stick.
They didn't vote for a Brexit, they voted for a Lexit. But the trouble is, they didn't get a Lexit, they got a Tory hardest of hard Brexits. And that's what we're reaping now, is the destruction of workers' rights, of employment rights, and the destruction of civil liberties. I mean, surely that's not what Mick Lynch voted for. And he would argue, well, it's not Brexit itself, it's just the way it's been carried out. But it was always going to happen. It was going to be a Tory government that saw Brexit in.
And those on the right now are all saying it's nothing wrong with Brexit. It's the type of Brexit. It's the way it was done. If we'd had a different Brexit, they don't explain what the different Brexit was, but we had a different Brexit. I've had people commenting on my thing saying, if we'd only got out properly instead of half out, well, what are they talking about? We left and we're in a chaotic mess, and there's no way you could have left to have avoided that.
Well, I've had a lot of comments on my channel saying it's because we had Remainer prime ministers, and they include Rishi Sunak in that, which I don't really understand. That it's all the fault of the EU. They've been vindictive, as though the EU as an organisation has emotions. They sort of anthropomorphise the EU. The EU couldn't get emotional about it. They were worried. They didn't want us to leave. Now that we have, they're making, as you said earlier, a good fist of it. But I'm sure they would never have, well, maybe they would have wanted us to leave. As you say, we're very troublesome, but there's certainly no emotions.
And the other reasons, of course, that it hasn't worked out are the pandemic and Putin and the last Labour government.
Yes, I love that one particularly. It's all Gordon Brown's fault.
That's right. Everybody's fault except those who brought it to us.
Yeah, it's quite Trumpian, isn't it? Really, the way that it's everybody else's fault, never their own.
Yes,
that there's a witch hunt against Brexit, perhaps.
Absolutely,
a conspiracy.
And of course, it's the Anti-Growth Alliance. That's people like you and me who just our aim is to be poorer and shrinking economy. That's what we want. Anti-growth. We don't want any growth.
Well, and of course we're liaising with the deep state to make sure that Brexit fails. Yes,
and the World Economic Forum and the Okay, I've got a question from Diesel Bushcraft, and he says the Bank of England's theory of putting up interest rates, I believe, is that a higher interest rate is to put people off spending on perhaps unnecessary items, and as a result control inflation. At the moment, I believe inflation is being driven by external factors such as the cost of fuels and energy due to several worldwide factors. I'm not highly educated, I'm just an ordinary working person, but I cannot for the life of me understand how increasing interest rates will curb this type of inflation.
I think Diesel's absolutely bang on the money there. The Bank of England's traditional response to inflation has been to raise interest rates to suck spending power away from consumers, but there's not the type of inflation we have right now. It's completely the wrong thing to do. Do I know better than the head of the Bank of England? Well, one would think not, but I do wonder. I mean, all I did was study a social sciences degree, of which economics was a small part, but even I know that you don't raise interest rates during a recession because it's just going to deepen the recession. And I'll tell you somebody, Michael, that knows a lot more about this than I do. It's a guy that's very prolific on Twitter. He's a professor of accounting practice at Sheffield University, a guy called Richard Murphy, who's written a free book called Money for Nothing. He sets out such a strong case against what the Bank of England is doing. And the current head of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, just doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He seems to be conflicting with government policy, such as it is, and making everything worse, raising interest rates at a time when we're entering what's predicted to be the longest recession on record. Just seems completely bonkers to me. The current head of the Bank of England, it seems to be a very different cast to Mark Carney, who seemed to really have things under control to a certain extent. This new guy just doesn't seem to know what he's doing.
But it does seem to me, on a very basic level, that if there isn't much discretionary spending going on, then what's the point in taking money out of the economy? But Mark Carney, I heard him on the radio just about a week ago or so, and he was talking a lot about how Brexit was really so much responsible for so many of our problems at the moment.
Next question, Michael, from Robin Fortune Heisman. How long do you think it will take for the stubborn majority of Brexit supporters to realise the error of their ways, and what events do you think it would take to trigger that realisation? Gradually,
every day, more and more people are realising that it's Brexit that's causing so many of our problems. I mean, we all know that worldwide there are problems as a result of, particularly of Putin's invasion and so on, and inflationary problems everywhere. But things are just worse here because of Brexit, and I think more and more people are beginning to realise that. And I think when you get the Daily Telegraph, as happened about 10 days ago, writing an article saying, talking about the failure of Brexit, more and more people are realising all the time what a disaster it was, and I don't think there's any event. It's going to be a whole series of events. It's going to be businesses closing, high streets getting even more empty, and people losing their houses, and knowing people who are losing their houses, and losing their jobs and so on. These are the sort of things that are gradually going to wear away at this tiny little resistance that we've got of people who still think Brexit was the best thing that ever happened because we've taken back control and we've stopped immigrants coming here. So yes, I think it's going to be attrition rather than any sudden event.
I used the analogy in my video last week. Brexit was never going to be a blowout, and the Brexitists love to say, "Oh, you Remainers said it was going to absolutely explode at once." Well, maybe there was one Remainer on Facebook that said that, but most of us knew that it was just going to be very, very attritional. And rather than a blowout on the motorway, it's going to be a slow puncture. But I just feel you mentioned the Daily Telegraph's change in stance to be calling out Brexit for what it is. But that slow puncture is almost like an audible hiss now, with the Financial Times video that went viral last week, just setting out the economic disaster of Brexit. And also the BBC, Ros Atkins was allowed to do a video expounding on how the failed Brexit experiment is just impacting most areas of public life. I think things are changing. I love looking at the Politico, that's a great website, but they do a poll tracker, and it's just showing the number of people that now regret voting for Brexit. Or the question actually is, in hindsight, did we make the right decision to leave the EU? And the trend is inescapable. I mean, already, it's almost 2/3 of people, if you take out the don't knows, 2/3 of people that think it was the wrong decision. And it's just getting ever wider, as you said, Michael, day by day. And let's not forget the demographics. I hate to be morose about this or morbid, but the demographic that voted for Brexit was the older generations who have been dying off every day since the Brexit vote. And even demographically, the 52-48 split, it reached halfway after sometime late in 2017. And we've had 5 years since then of more old people dying and more young people being able to vote that are overwhelmingly pro-EU. So, this idea it was the will of the people. Well, it was the will of the people in 2016. It's certainly not the will of the people today.
No, quite. And the will of the people in 2016 was people who really didn't know what they were voting for. And that's not patronising anybody. That's just it was the most complicated question that's ever been put forward in an electorate, probably ever anywhere. And people were voting on the basis of what Nigel Farage said in some sort of quip and Boris Johnson said and quips on television.
Well, I hate to even mention the word immigration, but of course that was what a lot of it was about. It's just really interesting. It's very much a right-wing talking point, as though we've got some crisis of immigration boats coming across the channel. It's not as bad as it has been in the past, but suddenly it's front-page news because it's the distraction from the economic mess and Brexit fallout. But I mean, the most scary thing of all is the Dublin Agreement that we were part of as an EU member meant that we were allowed to send would-be refugees back to the first safe country of origin. We can no longer do that. So Brexit, as with so many of the other promises, it's actually the opposite of the truth. It's made immigration far harder to control.
I've got a question here from Kaz Bryan, which says, Can you discuss the running down of the NHS?
I'm very lucky. I live down in the southwest, and the local hospitals in Exeter and Torquay just seem to be excellent. I can get a GP appointment same day, so I'm just really lucky where I live. But the NHS being run down, well, it started off with John Major, didn't it, with the private financing initiatives. That was the thin end of the wedge with privatisation. Tony Blair unfortunately accelerated that issue, and today we see more and more being privatised in the NHS. All these American insurance companies that seem to be being appointed to trustee positions, the widespread acquisition of GP practices by American private medical insurance companies. It's really concerning, Michael. It's not something I'm an expert on, but you just feel that there's creeping privatisation. You look at the number of vacancies in the NHS, 110,000 and rising, and you don't see any coordinated plan from the government to train up Indigenous people to fill those roles, yet at the same time they're saying we want to control immigration. It just feels like there's a plan to let the NHS wither on the vine. How do you feel?
No, I agree with you. Like you, I'm in West London, but I'm in an area where I've got an extremely good, I get extremely good service from the hospital and the doctors and all the rest of it. It's really wonderful. I couldn't complain at all. But I know the last time I went to the hospital, it wasn't really serious. About 2 years ago, I was talking to somebody about one particular department, and they said, "Oh, that's all been privatised, that department." That was in a section of quite a big hospital. And like you, I've heard about the doctor surgeries that are getting privatised, taken over by private companies. And I mean, there are those who believe this is a plan.
Yeah.
The plan is to privatise the National Health. I remember Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, disappeared in some sort of mysterious trip to California.
I remember.
One day.
Yeah.
And, do you remember that?
I do.
And it turned out he was meeting health providers there.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the plan is, but when the economy is so desperate, I mean, it's a great way of raising some money, isn't it? Sell the NHS. Yeah. And also then you absolve yourself of all the problems of running it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine logically for a government, it would be absolutely catastrophic for everybody else, and the service would be, would become very expensive and very difficult, and we would all suffer. I mean, you see stories. I saw a film the other day, a film called The Good Nurse with Eddie Redmayne, really great film. But there was the main character in this was a nurse, and she really badly needed an operation, and it was sort of life or death thing, and she had to work at her particular hospital or where she was working for 12 months before she could have this operation. And part of the film was about could she last till then. And you thought, supposing you're in that situation, you haven't got insurance to cover it, and you've got a life or death condition. I mean, it's just unthinkable, and yet you kind of don't think about it that much. But I think so many people, and we get such, on the whole, get such good service. If you get into a hospital, you're looked after so well and so on. And it seems such a precious resource, the National Health Service, that you're not actually paying for when you use it.
I just don't trust the Conservatives with it. I mean, they've recently been trying to claim it was them that brought the NHS in, which is just rewriting history to such a ludicrous extent. Every Tory government's tried to restrict NHS spending. If you look at every Labour government, they've increased NHS spending. The data's out there for anybody that cares to look. I don't trust the Conservatives with the NHS, and I particularly do not trust this current incarnation of the Tory party in charge of the NHS with all the ERG, BNP and UKIP infiltration that they've suffered. It's just scary. Next question, Michael, from the Freckle Puny. Thank you, Freckle Puny, another guy that's been very supportive of my channel. Just what will it take for the Tories to regain some modicum of sanity, especially in regard to Brexit, the economy, the environment and society overall? A purge of the Mad Hatters, such as Baker, Francois, Bridgen et al., will need to happen.
Well, definitely a purge of that lot, and I think a couple of terms in the wilderness would be a good thing. The fact that Johnson got rid of all the reasonable, decent Tories. I know a lot of people are going to be in the comments saying there's no such thing as
Tory,
but there are some very decent Tories. There are one or two still remaining. But no, they have to get rid of this crazy lot. Either that or the party will split. But I think since they're all, I watched Braverman's statement last week about immigration, and one after another, I noticed these people getting up one after another, you either got these really second-rate, wishy-washy little people, non-entities coming up and then just wittering on, or you got the right-wing crazies, the ones we all know about, who are just so bigoted, so xenophobic, and so small-minded, so littling. They're really nasty old men. And they are almost all old men. They have to get rid of all that lot, and they've got no chance. Whilst those old men are really controlling, as they are now, we know that Sunak depends upon them like Johnson did, because he couldn't upset them because there are too many of them. Till they get rid of them, they're never going to be a proper party again. And I suspect that if they lose the next election, they'll go away, and they'll probably most of those, a lot of them will retire, and they'll replace them with some more reasonable people. Yeah. Because I think there is a place for a reasonable Conservative party.
But this is on Boris Johnson, isn't it? Because Boris Johnson, as a prerequisite of anybody standing in any constituencies, the Tory MP last time in 2019, they had to swear allegiance to the Brexit experiment. So he filtered out all the Remain pro-EU people, and that's where it's got a sort of intellectually hampered Tory party.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and of course, as a result of that condition, as a result of that condition, we end up with a cabinet with 19 people who believed in, canvassed for, and voted for Remain out of 30. I mean, did they all suddenly change their minds, or were they lying?
Yeah, it is one or the other. Yeah.
And the fact they changed the possibility of them changing their minds is inconceivable. It was just absolute madness. So that's why one of the reasons we end up with such a second-rate Tory party in Parliament, I think. Yeah.
Somehow, Michael, this I would say small group, I mean a big enough group, as you say, to control the narrative for the Tory party, but the European Research Group, I love that name because they're so anti-European and they don't do any research, but the taxpayers are paying to fund them, basically. But the ERG, they reckon they've only got probably about 30 members now. It's gradually been whittled away. But they still seem to be the kingmakers. They still seem to be the tail that's wagging the Tory dog. And obviously they're all aligned with the Tufton Street Masters, which is where a lot of the sort of philosophy comes from, if not the funding. But perhaps that's what gives them sort of an oversized power within the party, perhaps.
Sorry, there only need to be 30 of them to hold the government. 30 of them vote against the government or don't vote. I mean, that's it. So they have got a great deal of power, that small group. Yeah.
There, can I just make a big apology? I've got just pages here of questions that we've had sent in, and we've just only touched upon them. So my huge apologies to anybody that's we've not got to your question. I'm really sorry about that. But Michael, I'm sure I'm definitely up for doing this again sometime soon, and perhaps we can include some more people next time. But thank you to everybody for watching. Michael, have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to everyone who sent in questions and everyone who's kind enough to watch this. And till next time. Bye for now.
We are the Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart of YouTube, aren't we, really?